Hello friends, welcome to Theology Made Kids Storytime. Tonight's story is about a boy who grew up poor, but became a hero of faith, standing up for the truth even when the whole world seemed against him. His name was John Hus, and though he would one day become a famous preacher, tonight we meet him as a small boy with a big dream. Let's begin. A long time ago, in a tiny village in Bohemia, which is now part of the Czech Republic, a boy named John Hus was born into a very poor family. His home was a small wooden house with a dirt floor. He had no fine clothes, no expensive toys, and most days, his family barely had enough food to eat. But John had something more precious than gold. He had a hunger for knowledge. At night, when the fire burned low, he would sit beside his mother, listening to stories from the Bible. He loved hearing about Daniel in the lion's den, about David and Goliath, and about Jesus, who loved the poor just as much as the rich. One night, John looked up at his mother with bright, eager eyes. "Mother," he said, "I want to learn. I want to read. And one day, I want to teach people about God." His mother smiled, though there were tears in her eyes. "Then we must pray," she said. "God will make a way." In those days, poor boys didn't go to school. Only the sons of rich families could afford an education. But John's mother was determined. She worked harder than ever, saving every tiny coin she could. And one day, she had just enough to send John to school in the nearest town. When the time came for John to leave, his mother packed a small bundle of food and placed her hands on his head. "Go, my son," she whispered. "God is with you." With bare feet and a heart full of hope, young John set out on foot, walking miles to a new life. When John arrived at school, he couldn't believe his eyes. There were tall stone buildings, boys dressed in fine robes, and books everywhere. But John quickly realized something. He didn't belong. The other boys laughed at his simple clothes. They called him a beggar. They teased him because he didn't know Latin, the language all educated people spoke. John's face burned with shame. He wanted to run home. But then he remembered his mother's prayers, and he whispered to himself, "God is with me." So instead of running away, he worked harder than anyone. He woke up before sunrise to study. He memorized Bible verses when the other boys were playing. And little by little, the poor boy from the village became the top student in his class. Years passed, and John grew into a young man, known for his sharp mind and kind heart. But one day, he saw something that troubled him deeply. As he studied the Bible, he realized that the church leaders were not following the teachings of Jesus. They were selling forgiveness for money, telling people that they could buy their way to heaven. John knew this was wrong, and he knew he had to speak up. But there was a problem. Anyone who questioned the church's teachings was in great danger. Some had even been thrown into prison, or worse. John felt his heart pounding. Would he be brave enough to stand for the truth? That night, he knelt in prayer and whispered the same words he had spoken as a little boy. "God is with me." From that day on, John began teaching the truth boldly. He preached in the city square, calling people to follow Jesus, not just man-made rules. People listened. Some were angry, others were inspired, but no one could ignore him. John's voice echoed through the streets, and soon the whole city was talking about his words. And though his story would take him into even greater trials, nothing could stop the truth from spreading. Because when God is with you, no one can silence his word. John Hus's story reminds us that you're never too young to stand up for what's right, even when people look down on you, even when it's scary. Because the same God who gave John Hus courage is the same God who is with you, no matter what. Good night, little one. Sleep well, knowing that God has great plans for you.